Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Hey, greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Dives, Al, and Rick all ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This week is December 11th, 2022, episode 37 coming at you. We have a special guest this week. Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents is co-hosting us. We want to welcome him. This week in the news, we got an update on the AP sex abuse lawsuit and the BYU sports update. Let's see. Church has donated $10 million to eradicate polio. Big props to the church. Huge month for giving for the LDS Church. Also, the Respect for Marriage bill is headed for President Biden's desk. It's been ratified by both the House and the Senate, so it's well on its way. How you doing, Dives?
Hey, I'm doing very, very well. If you want to get in touch with us, we're at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send us an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. That's KOLOB. And we'd like to welcome you, Rick. Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
It's an honor and a privilege. I've watched so many of your episodes, and it's great to have you on board. You have a YouTube channel. It's called Gospel Tangents. When did you start that, and what's that all about?
Yeah, it's been almost 7 years. I started it in January. In January, it will be 7 years. And so it's kind of a 360-degree view of Mormonism. I don't just try to go to the LDS Church. I try to look at all the expressions of Mormonism. There are about 500, according to Steve Shields. And I've talked to about 20 of them, so I've got a long way to go. But I like to talk to people from all over the Restoration, polygamists, Community of Christ, Bickertonites, Strangites, everybody, whether they've been excommunicated. I've talked to, Paul and Margaret Toscano, Dan Vogel. I've talked to a general authority, Stephen Snow. BYU professors are on all the time, Paul Reeve, Matt Harris. I try to hit pretty much every part of the Restoration that you can. So
yeah, well, I've listened to almost every one of those episodes you rattled off. The Toscano, the Matt Harris, a couple of those other episodes that you brought out. I've listened to all of those. What is your favorite Gospel Tangents episode?
That's like asking me my favorite ice cream. They're all good.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I kind of the ones I listed off the top of my head are probably the most memorable ones. Matt Harris, he feels like a brother to me. We're just, I've had Matt on about 4 times. I've had Neil Bringhurst on about 4 times. My big get was Elder Snow. He was still a sitting general authority. They're really hard to get. And he was the church historian a while back, and that was a lot of fun. So
that was a great episode. I think I listened to the Matt Harris episodes, I think maybe even 2 times, and also Elder Snow. It was just a couple of months before he retired. I listened to that episode, so I want to give a huge endorsement to the Gospel Tangents. Really, really good stuff. Really, really interesting. And I give you my highest endorsement for sure.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you going at the entire spectrum of Mormonism, because very early on, it might have even been our first episode that we did here, Dives and I, we kind of talked about what it means to be a Mormon, and basically we kind of defined that as anybody who follows the teachings of Joseph Smith and his restoration. So I think if you've got already dabbled into the first 20 of 500, you're off to a really good start compared to most people's understanding of Mormonism. So I applaud you for that, Rick.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just love talking to all my Mormon cousins, so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Have you, is there any particular branch of Mormonism that you found like noteworthy or entertaining?
Besides the LDS Church?
yeah, exactly. Just that's really interesting.
Like John Hamer says, the LDS Church is kind of Jupiter compared to all the other ones. The other ones are all like Mercury, they're all really tiny. Yeah. But, I mean, Matthew Gill was super interesting. He's just got a small group. I think only about 15 people in his little restoration branch. And, For those who don't know, the angel Raphael appeared to him and gave him some plates, and he translated them, and it turns out that it was a record of the people who built Stonehenge, and strangely enough, they're relatives of the Jaredites.
Wow.
So, Raphael's been busy. He's also ordained another prophet, David Fairman of the Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship in Ohio. And he also gave the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon to Mauricio Berger. I just call them the Brazil group. I'm trying to remember what their official name was. But they have the sealed Book of Mormon down there in Brazil. So Raphael has been busy, I'll tell you that.
Sounds like it. My goodness, he gets around.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't hear more about like Moroni or Nephi, some of the originals coming back.
Well, I think they're more with the fundamentalist side. Joseph Smith has appeared to, I think, if I remember right, David Fairman, he's appeared to James Strang. He appeared to, who's the other one I was just thinking of? Oh, Mauricio Berger. He often appears to fundamentalist Mormons. And, and I use that term Mormon because, we're all Mormons. Even, the community of Christ, they don't like to be called Mormons. But, I even talked to their historian, Bill Russell, and he's like, it fits us. Anybody who follows the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, and I think we're all Mormons, that's a pretty fair way of denoting it, or
yeah. And I know that might be stealing some thunder from later, but anyway,
that's all right. It's actually really good to have you on for this week's episode because of for later. Is there anything else that you'd like to share us about your own personal beliefs or your religious background before we move on? Or
I try to be as neutral as possible. A lot of people try to get my opinions, and it's really hard for me to give them because I'm trying to be like Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America. Some of you guys are going to be like, who is that? But he was like the famous newsman when I was growing up, and that was his title, was the most trusted man in America. So I like to be the most trusted man in the Restoration. And
done.
So.
Yeah. I noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that in our rehearsals that you are you're a little bit, a little bit slippery, kind of hard to pin down, but that's okay. That's fun. That's no problem. We're not about pinning people down. That's for sure.
That's right.
But what we do, however, with one caveat, we do want to pin you down because you have the Mormon News Roundup joke of the week. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, what did Cupid say to the girl who had a crush on Samuel the Lamanite?
Oh my God.
That's a tough question.
Let me think about that for a second. Hold on. Show me a sign.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
I tried.
Well played.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, he just couldn't hit him.
Couldn't hit him.
Yeah, okay. It took me a second on that one. It took me a second. Yeah, it took me a second on that one. I know that you're a big time university guy, so the rest of us, it takes a little longer for the rest of us to keep up with it, right? For sure. Now, some follow-ups here from last week. We want to just follow up. BYU has finished the season, football that is, and they're headed to the New Mexico Bowl to play SMU. And by the way, that goes along with our Mormon News Roundup question of the week, which is only available on Anchor. If you come on over to Anchor, you can answer the question of the week, which says who's going to win the game. Is it going to be BYU football or is it going to be SMU? And also a couple of other sports updates. We have BYU basketball. They're off to a rough start, and they lost to UVU for the second year in a row.
Woohoo! See, I work at UVU, so I got to give UVU credit there. So.
Yeah.
I thought you wanted to be the most liked man in Mormonism. There, you're not off to a very good start
well,
here.
Well, when it comes to BYU, I'm a little bit of a partisan. I'll admit that. So.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and the U of U. You went to the University of Utah too, right, Rick?
I did, and they're going their second straight Rose Bowl. So back-to-back Pac-12 champions. You can't complain about that. So.
As I recall,
better than the New Mexico Bowl. I'll say that.
Yeah, as I recall, Gordon B. Hinckley was a big U of U fan over BYU as well, so you're in good company.
Well, it is the School of the Prophets, Gordon B. Hinckley, President Monson, Russell Nelson. It's the School of the Prophets, I'm telling you.
Sure
And
seems to be.
wasn't it Worthland who actually played for the University of Utah football team? It was Joseph B. Worthland
Really?
who was. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
Oh,
yeah,
how
I'm
did I
almost.
not know that? I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, he never missed a game. Yeah, he was a big
Wow.
University of Utah fan. So you're gloating over UVU, you're gloating over the University of Utah, you're just holding it over the Cougars, and yet you're this is all politically correct.
Yeah,
That seems
Well,
hard to believe.
sports is different than real life, so
Oh,
we
it
can
is.
have fandom.
okay.
Well,
Now,
everybody can learn something on the Mormon News Roundup, so we're glad you're here.
That's right.
just
And
real
I
quick,
just, I have a lot of friends at BYU, and I just love to rub in that Utah's going to the Rose Bowl again. So
That's fair.
yeah. Absolutely. Now, for those of you out there listening, would you please give us a rating? We'd appreciate give us a thumbs up, drop us a like, drop us a subscription, rate us with 5 stars. We would greatly appreciate that. And we do want to follow up here with an article that just hit from the Coach. This is from the Herald Review, and it's the local paper there in Cochise County. And this was just a couple of days ago, following up on the big Michael Resendez AP child sex abuse lawsuit, which was dropped last summer. I think it was in July, where Paul Adams, who ended up committing suicide in jail, sexually abused 2 children, and that he reported it to 2 bishops, and neither of those bishops made a report to law enforcement. Well, that particular case has been going on for quite some time. This case is like 10 or 12 years old, and it's just now reported here from this Herald Review. We're giving you the latest and the greatest here is that there are signals that this court case, which has been going on for quite some time, is headed to mediation. In fact, it may be being settled outside of court, and this is not something that very few people, I think, were expecting, least of which was me. I thought that the families of the 2 children were abused, the lawyers representing them, they made no indications that they were looking for mediation.
Mm-hmm.
That appears to be changing, and I think that's a big story.
Yeah, it seems like the family was very insistent on this being made as big of a deal as possible to take this as far as they could. And, I think that's fair. That's completely justified when it comes to the sexual abuse of 2 children, especially one being an infant. So it is a little surprising to hear that they're considering mediation and settling outside of court. If that helps these kids feel better about the situation, if that brings them peace, then I'm all for it. Whatever means they need to go through.
Yeah, I think that the church for sure wants to see this case settled as soon as possible. I mean, I can't imagine that the church wants to go through to draw this out. And I think
Yeah.
that, anecdotally speaking, I don't have any evidence of this. It's speculation, but I think that the vast majority of the sexual assault cases that would reflect poorly on the church is eager to settle. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
if you listen to the Mormon Stories episode with who's the lawyer that they had on there, who did a lot of these LDS sexual abuse scandals. He says that the church, I forget his name, I'm sorry, but he says that the church is very eager to settle most of these cases, and that they're not afraid to do so in a rapid manner.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that could be what's happening here. And I think that is a positive step for the church, because I mean, this has been really going through the news quite a bit, and it'd be nice to see this get off of the radar and hopefully see if the family's compensated for whatever abuse it is that they went through.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this article here, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. The last thing the church wants to have is this splashed on court TV, and they just want to keep it as quiet as possible. So I see, and plus mediation, I think, is a lot less expensive for both sides, and so
Sure, yeah,
I'm sure that's why they're pursuing that.
Yeah, remember these after the AP sex abuse scandal hit, where it was said that the Kurt McConkie lawyers were involved, they redid the suit and named Mr. Nelson and also another Kurt McConkie lawyer into the suit, and they also tried to name I think it was the risk management department of the church as well, because once they learned additional details, they said, well, these people were derelict in their duties as well, and we want to sue them. I mean, it was getting bigger and bigger, and I really hope that this thing gets settled and taken care of as soon as possible, and that if that's what the families want, then I would be grateful to see this put behind everyone. That's what I'm hoping.
I think everybody wants to see this in the rearview mirror.
Exactly, especially those poor girls.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be releasing in on December 25th the top 10 Mormon LDS related news stories of the year. And a spoiler alert, that is the number 2 story of the year. And speaking of the number 1 story, that's our next news article. Is the U.S. House of Representatives passes final Respect for Marriage Act. Now the bill is going to President Biden for signature. And President Biden has signaled that he is very eager to sign this particular landmark legislation because it's going to guarantee federal rights benefits for marriage and federal code for same-sex couples. It's going to get rid of the DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which Bill Clinton passed in 1995 to 1996. It's going to affirm that public acts, records, and proceedings should be recognized by all states. So all marriages in all states will be recognized, and that's regardless of if Obergefell, I have a hard time saying that, Obergefell, if that falls, if that gets overturned, this is going to keep those marriages legitimate so that we won't have something like what happened with Proposition 8 in California, where a judge overturned the laws in California, and then all of a sudden there was a mad rush and there was a big mess. Kind of like what happened with the Roe versus Wade overturning, where as soon as it was overturned, you went back to all these arcane laws and it was a giant mess. This law, the Respect for Marriage Act, is going to make sure that no matter what the Supreme Court does, who's the Supreme Court's very right wing at this time, that you're going to have rights for same-sex couples, including interracial couples. So, I mean, this dovetails into our number 1 news story of the year for the LDS Church. What do you think about this article here, Al?
This article, I'm glad to see it go through proper channels, because you're absolutely right. When they overturned, the Supreme Court just magnanimously overturned Roe versus Wade last summer and decided, oh, well, no, that's this standing law from the past 40 years is now being declared unconstitutional. People were up in arms over that. People were very upset. However, when legislation goes through the proper channels, the way that the Constitution was originally set up to work, a bill goes to the House or the Senate and then crosses over to the other building, and then from there, once it's ratified, it goes to the president's desk, and the president signs it or vetoes it. And then once he signs it, it goes to the Supreme Court to get ratified as well and declared constitutional. So people like to see that process work. So when you see somebody do something like, with regards to the president does executive orders that kind of accomplish the same thing. It's like, oh, well, we have a very dire situation, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass a law myself, being the executive branch, to get this done. People that don't agree with the president they kick back at that pretty hard. So I'm glad to see that this is going through proper channels, because that's something that, regardless, people are on both sides are going to have to say, yeah, that's right. This is done the way it's supposed to be done.
Absolutely, Rick. Now, we were discussing in the pre-show rehearsal that we had, Rick, that you brought up that Mormon Land podcast from this week, where you had a couple of, shall we say, more right-leaning members of the church who said, our church is wrong on the Respect for Marriage Act, says, Orthodox members are having a serious problem with the church's support for this legislation. How do you think this is all going to play out?
Well, one of the points that those two guys made, and I think it is a good point. I'm all for this new act, and I'm surprised President Biden hasn't already signed it. Maybe he'll wait for tomorrow. But one of the things they said is this kind of stuff gets handled in the courts. And so while I know you guys said this is going to be the law of the land, well, the Supreme Court can throw out any law unless it's a constitutional amendment. And so I don't know that this is quite on as strong of a footing to say that the Supreme Court won't overrule it. I mean, I think it is interesting that they're tying gay marriage and interracial marriage together, because one of the people who's against gay marriage is Justice Thomas, and his wife is white and he's black, and so he is in an interracial marriage. So it would be interesting to see if he would say, well, we're going to strike down same-sex marriage because I don't like that, but we're going to keep the interracial marriage because obviously he's in an interracial marriage. So I think it would put him in a very tough position. But, the way that our Supreme Court is right now, I don't think any law, unless it's a constitutional amendment, can't be looked at by a conservative Supreme Court and just thrown out. So in that sense, I think I would agree with those two guys that sometimes the Supreme Court has the final say. Even with the Defense of Marriage Act, if you look at the Obergefell decision, the Supreme Court basically nullified the Defense of Marriage Act and allowed gay marriage. So, to say that this is repealing that, well, I think the Supreme Court already repealed that as far as gay marriage is concerned. It's nice that they're finally codifying the interracial marriage in there as federal law, but I don't, if the conservatives don't want to keep it, I don't see any reason why they couldn't say, hey, we're going to strike out this provision. I mean, they did that with the abortion ruling. So I wouldn't put it past the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't. What I would just say is that when you have to get signed by the president, signed by both House and the Senate, it's going to put it on a stronger footing than just a Supreme Court fiat.
But that's what they did with DOMA in 1995. Bill Clinton signed it. It was passed by Congress. And then, with the Obergefell decision, they threw it out anyway.
And the interracial marriage, the challenging of that was Lovins. That again was a Supreme Court fiat. So again, we're trying to replace Supreme Court fiats with proper legislative process, which is what Al said is a better solution. And I agree.
It just seems like it sets better with the general population when it's done that way.
Well, I think so, but I'm just saying the Supreme Court, if they think this is unconstitutional for some reason, I don't think they'll hesitate to throw it out. Especially this current Supreme Court. After throwing out abortion, I wouldn't put anything past the Supreme Court.
No, I wouldn't either. It'll be very interesting. This is obviously, in my opinion, this is the number one LDS Church-related news article of the year, because this really just blew up the nets, and that's how we're going to be releasing our top 10 on December 25th, and this is the number one. And I kind of suspect that this is the brainchild, that this is the church's support for this particular bill is the brainchild of Dell and H. Oaks. Am I just way out on a limb here? Am I way out on a limb, or am I on a solid foundation there?
I think that we have some very intelligent people that are in charge of the LDS Church, and they know that if this debate is going to be happening behind closed doors, they definitely want to have a representative in that room at that table. And so I think that's exactly why the church has been so heavily involved in this from the beginning.
Well, and of course, Dallin Oaks was a Utah Supreme Court justice and knows the law extremely well. So anytime we're dealing with law, of course, Dallin Oaks' fingerprints are going to be all over it. I don't think that should surprise anyone. Plus, I interviewed Taylor Petrie a couple years ago about his book. Why can't I think of the name of it? But it was about gay marriage and interracial marriage. And one of the things he indicated in the book was that when Oaks was put in 1984, I think it was, that he became the point person for the gay marriage debate and how the church would respond to that as early as 84, because he could see that coming down the pipeline. So yeah, I think it. I mean, he's also the one that did the Utah Compact, I believe, about immigration. So anything law-related, Oaks is going to play a major role in that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure looks like it.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Signature Books, www.signaturebooks.com. We invite you to check out their latest book written by Romney Burke, which is entitled Susie Young Gates, Daughter of Mormonism.
Brigham Young had over 50 wives and 56 children, but none has better name recognition than daughter Susie Young Gates. She lived from 1856 and died in 1933. Yet she, like so many women of Mormonism's past, has remained a mystery to most church members. In Susie Young Gates, Romney Burke, the author, paints a portrait of a strong woman who rose to prominence within the church, fought for the rights of women throughout the country, yet dealt with personal trials and her share of heartbreak. So now we're going to jump over to the Washington Post for a follow-up here This is actually a different. This isn't the follow up to the. We've already done the follow up. This one is now the polygamous leader claimed 20 wives, including minors. The FBI says. Article by Marissa Iati from December 7th, and so she broke this about Samuel Rappley Bateman. He's the leader of an offshoot of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he he has gone around basically claiming that he feels inspired by the Lord to take on more than one wife. And a lot of times these wives include, one of them has included his own 14-year-old daughter. Some of them as young as 9, his wives. And this was all like blown out in the open because there was a trailer that was being towed down to southern Utah, where the Arizona border, and there was little kids' fingers sticking out of the side of the trailer, poking at the sunlight. And people happened to notice this, so they called the police. The police pulled them over and found that there was 3 kids in the back of this trailer. And it's a form of human trafficking. A lot of the polygamous sects that have a lot of kids involved, they engage in human trafficking, both for labor and sometimes for sexual purposes. Including Mr. Bateman has instructed his wives and children to engage sexually with other members of his flock. And what I can't abide by is the fact that this guy is saying that it's the Lord that's speaking to him, and it's not just him living life from between his legs and making his decisions that way. It's really disgusting. I'm glad that this came to light, and it looks like this is going to turn out pretty ugly for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much media coverage this article really got. I mean, it was covered by all the way across the pond to England, to Great Britain. It was covered all the way around the world. See, the thing is that these type of articles, they get a lot of eyeballs because when you hear the word Mormon combined with sexual abuse, that just people are just gravitate to that, and they want to read these articles. And they really don't, a lot of people don't have a real understanding of what it is that they're reading. All they see is Mormon and sexual abuse and polygamy. And, it catches fire. What do you think about this article here, Rick?
Well, it says he's a leader of an offshoot of the Fundamentalist Church, which, a lot of people aren't going to make that distinction. I know the picture in the Washington Post, the women are dressed in those blue and purple dresses, and they look very FLDS. Obviously in Mormon land, if I can use that term, we're going to recognize these aren't members of our church, but other people clearly are not. I know that here in Utah, as long as they're not breaking any laws and they're not doing underage marriages, we were leaving them alone. This obviously took place I thought it was in Canada.
He's been all over the map.
Washington State.
Oh, Washington State. So probably just right over from, because it seems like there is a big polygamous offshoot in Vancouver area. So that's probably just right over the border there in Washington. But anytime you're getting involved in underage marriages, I think law enforcement should get involved, and that's a terrible thing. So I don't care whether you're a self-proclaimed prophet. I mean, you talk to Bill Russell from the Community of Christ, and he says every prophet is a self-proclaimed prophet.
Yeah. Well, we saw there was a poll that was a couple of months ago that talked about the person. They surveyed quite a few people, just average Americans, and they said, what do you know about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? What do you know about Mormons? And 30% of the average Americans think that Mormons practice polygamy. So when you give these readers to the Washington Post, a lot of people think, up to a third or even more people think that this article is related to the church that's headquartered in Salt Lake City.
Well, they do, but I mean, you could say that about Muslims or Jews or whatever, and people are going to mix up all those beliefs. So I don't I don't really fault the public. But, and I know President Nelson's making a big deal about using the proper name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, that's what the name of their church is. They just put the word fundamentalist in front of it. So I don't know that that's, even with us saying, well, we're not Mormons anymore, that's not going to help because the church names are so similar.
Yeah.
And, with the restoration, I mean, I can tell you the Strangites are called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Cutlerites are called the Church of Jesus Christ. The Bickertonites are called the Church of Jesus Christ. So I don't know that using the official name is going to fix anything for anybody who wants to distinguish between LDS and FLDS. It's just going to be a problem that we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, if the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints says, hey, we don't want to be Mormons, or don't call us Mormons, or even some are saying we're not Mormons at all, then does that open it up for someone like Bateman to be a Mormon? I mean, that's...
Well, I interviewed Benjamin Schaefer from a polygamous group. They're called Christ Church. And he's like, I'm proudly a Mormon. You guys can be the ex-Mormons. We'll be the Mormons.
Well, like Thomas Monson said, I am a Mormon boy. He said that in General Conference. He sang a little song that went along with that.
It was President Benson, Ezra Taft Benson.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was his favorite.
You can see that
song
on YouTube. It's hilarious to see President Benson singing, I'm a Mormon boy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, you bet. And that goes with our poll of the week, which we're kind of running a little bit short on time here. So we're just going to direct our viewers over to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week, which is available on Anchor. And it says, how do you feel about Samuel Bateman being arrested for polygamy and child sex abuse? If you come on over to Anchor, you can interact with us on that poll. And that does take us to our next article here, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints donates $10 million to stop polio and maternal and neonatal tetanus. This is from the church's newsroom here on 9 December 2022. Official news release. It says half of the polio donation targets under-immunized communities throughout Africa. So the church is donating $5 million to Rotary International in an attempt to eradicate polio. And polio is really only extant in, I think it's only about 2 other countries. It's like Nigeria and Afghanistan. There's only a couple of other countries where polio is still around. We've almost eradicated it. Smallpox, I guess, is about the only the only immuno disease that the earth has eradicated. But polio we're really close. And $5 million, that's a lot of money. And remember, why is this newsworthy? Well, if you think about it, the church also donated $5 million to UNICEF food program back in September. And the huge donation a couple of months ago, $32 million to the World Food Program, where they sent one of the presiding bishops out to the UN and presented with the World Food Program with an oversized check for $32 million. So if you tally all that up, $5 million for polio, $5 million for UNICEF food program, $32 million to the World Food Program. This is all just in the last couple of months, plus the giving machines. And those, it's been released by the church of those giving machines, which are like vending machines, but for humanitarian purposes, those are bringing in about $2 million a year. If you tally all that up, in the last few months, the church is really in an unprecedented stretch of donations, the likes of which I can't recall.
Yeah, they've really dipped into their pockets and shelled out more money than we've ever seen. I do feel it's important to point out they still have not reached tithing level, though. We're still below 10%. However, well done.
Yeah, it's nice to see. Rick,
Well, and I just want to point out, I know the anti-vaxxers are growing, and we donated $5 million. The church has donated $5 million for polio prevention. And so clearly the church is pro-vax, and follow the prophet, please. It's silly to me that people claim that vaccines are, harming people. And clearly that's not what the church believes. And they're putting their money where their mouth is with trying to eradicate polio, which I think is wonderful. I'd love to do the same with COVID, but
yeah.
Well, the church, if you look at the last humanitarian report, which was released by the church, I want to say it was back in April is when they released the 2021 humanitarian report. The church reported that it was a huge number of COVID vaccine doses. It was definitely more than 1 million, but the church donated a lot of COVID vaccine doses. So yeah,
Mhm.
anyone who speculates that the church is anti-vaccine, I really don't see how you can say that, considering the amount of money and the amount of donations that we've seen towards eradicating.
Yeah.
Well, and I know some of these people like to pride themselves on following the prophet, but follow the prophet, get a vaccine.
Yeah,
Get
I'm
so
definitely with you there, Rick. It's nice to presently be fighting polio and these diseases in a different part of the world. With the anti-vax movement, we've seen such a resurgence in measles and other ones, or other diseases that were almost eradicated. Uh, get vaccinated. Take the vaccines. Nobody's trying to give your kids autism or mess with you. This is, I'm with you on this one, Rick.
yeah.
This is something where if we don't take our vaccines, pretty soon we're going to have to be fighting polio here again. And
Right.
yeah, that was a really nasty thing.
Yeah, I had a neighbor, unfortunately, who was a
Mhm.
very active member of the church, and she did her. I've had a couple of different people. She did her quote unquote research, thought that COVID vaccines were some kind of a hoax, and now she lives out of the back of a van. Absolutely crazy.
Well, yeah. I just
Hashtag van
follow the
life.
prophet.
Yeah.
You know,
Get your vaccines.
my mother's home teachers, both of them did their quote unquote research that said that there was some problem with the vaccines. They decided not to take it. And the father, he ended up getting COVID and he passed away because he's elderly. And it's just like,
Mhm.
what a loss. And that they were just a wonderful couple. My mother loved them dearly and they were really great people. I've met them on a number of times. And just because he, thought that he knew more than scientists, now he's not around anymore. And it's just
Mhm.
he died really for absolutely nothing, and it's just a
Yeah.
horrifying and a tragedy. And the sickest part is that in his obituary, they said that they didn't mention that he passed away from COVID. They said that it was something else, but those of us who knew, that his family was too embarrassed to write the real reasons for his death. I mean, there's just no reason for any of this. It's really bad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to see where the LDS population's sitting in Utah right now?
yes, please.
So this one's coming from Twitter from a good friend. Could we consider him a friend, D-Vase? Do we know Ryan Berg?
He's not an enemy.
He's not an enemy. We love this guy. We have reported his tweets a couple times in the past, several times in the past, actually. And he says, according to the religion census, Latter-day Saints are losing population share rapidly in several counties in Utah. And he has on this tweet, and you can access this through the show notes, he has the map of Utah and the different counties all drawn out with the numbers that show the change in LDS adherent rate in 2010 versus 2020. So these are the reportings of how many people are part of the LDS community.
Self-identified.
Self-identified, yep, exactly. So we see that in some cases, we've got double digits dropping. And it's not terribly surprising because a lot of these places are kind of across the middle of the state with the national parks and things like Moab, those counties down there. They have huge double-digit drops because you have a lot of people that are moving in or, that are not LDS that are moving into these areas. But then you have other places like there's only 3 counties in the whole state that are reporting growth. 2 of those are double-digit growth. One of them, I think, is Wayne County down in the center of the state, where Zion's National Park is. The other 2 are up the top as part of the state, and one of those is Rich County, which we've seen that, according to the LDS churches reporting, in Rich County you had more members of the church than you actually had citizens. So
Yeah, we did report that last week. The
yeah.
census, the church is reporting more members in Rich County than there are actual citizens in Rich County, which is kind of a surprise. That's why that plus 22 number is there. Although there can be reasonable reasons for that, it's kind of it's kind of confusing. But yeah, I mean, church membership across the state of Utah is down. If you look at the national statistics, before the census, Christian religion in particular went down from 2010 to 2020, went down 12%. But what you're seeing in the state of Utah is a higher than the national average. So I don't think that you can just blame this on COVID, because yes, COVID definitely affect religious participation and self-identification, but we're seeing a higher than normal rate for LDS drop in participation. What do you think could be the reason for it, Rick?
Well, the culture wars. I think that's the number one thing. I think people are just getting sick of them, and it seems like religion and politics, especially with the Republican Party, has become so intertwined that if you want to either reject Republicans or reject religion, well, you're probably going to reject them both at the same time. And I think that's the biggest reason.
Well, then let me ask you: do you think that then it was a mistake for the church to wade into the Respect for Marriage Act, because is that a culture war, or
The one that just passed?
yeah,
The House? Yeah. Well, I think that's a way of extricating themselves from the culture war. So
that's a surrender.
yeah, a little bit. I mean, they probably, it could be argued that they should have never gotten involved in that, and that's what those couple of guys on Mormon land said. They should have never gotten involved in that, and if they hadn't, maybe we wouldn't be seeing these big drops now. So, but I mean, this is really, if you look at history, if you want to look at the long arc of history, I was talking with Dr. Jesse James. He was a professor at Graceland University in Iowa. It's a Community of Christ college, and one of the things he said is, you have these waves. You got the first Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening, and it could be argued with the church growth between, say, 1950 and 1990, 2000, that was kind of a third Great Awakening, and we may identify that later as the third Great Awakening. And maybe I probably am doing my decades probably a little bit too broad, but these things are cyclical. So it wouldn't surprise me. We've got a big drop, and then in 10, 20 years, we'll come up with the fourth Great Awakening, and people will jump back in the church. But for now, I think that the culture wars, especially with the Republican Party, that has led to a lot of discontent with religion as well, and because those have become so intertwined.
Yeah, well, I would say that the fourth Great Awakening is probably taking place right now. It's just not happening in Utah; it's happening in Africa.
Seems to be.
Well, yeah, I was talking about the United States, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and you're echoing the same thing that Elder Bednar said at the National Press Club. He said that he said the exact same thing, that there's periods of prosperity that had happened in England in the in the 1830s and 40s, that was where the field was white all ready to harvest, and then in the United States, as you said, maybe from the 60s to the mid 90s, and then in Africa it's from from the mid 90s to say 2015, it was in Latin America and the Philippines, those type of countries, and South America. And then now from 2015 on, you would see that it would be in Africa. So those are the kind of waves that you're talking about. And I think that that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and COVID didn't help anything. So
yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah, it didn't help any religiosity in general has been on a long arc of decline, and COVID did it absolutely no favors. Now,
and
if
it's
you want
probably why a lot of evangelicals were like, "Don't shut down my church,"
Yeah, because they got out of habit of going. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you want to find us on Twitter, we're at News Mormon on Twitter. We'd love for you to come over and let us know your thoughts on our program, on our broadcast. We're also on YouTube. If you just search for Mormon News Roundup, we upload all of these podcasts onto YouTube. We'd love for you to give us a thumbs up, drop us a subscription. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, this next article here, I've hesitated to cover this particular person a number of times because I don't know. You find this is, let me just give you the background on it. This is Michael Adam Davis. This was tweeted out a couple of days ago on December 6th. And he is a convicted sex offender who was sentenced to, on November 29th, to 30 years in prison for inappropriate contact. He was a elders quorum president in the state of Minnesota, and he had inappropriate contact with a young child. And this was his second offense. And I can tell you that because he had an offense back in Utah, he was a perpetrator. And because the church does not run background checks as a matter of course for states that do not require background checks, he was not background checked before he was put into that elders quorum position. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have hesitated to report on him because yes, there's plenty of people all over the place in every religion, in every church, atheists, whatever, that are predators, that are sexual predators, that make mistakes and should be locked away. And I find no joy in reporting upon Mr. Michael Davis and his deviance. Okay, so yeah, he was sentenced. I didn't want to cover it. The only reason that we wanted to cover this is because somebody has this has been tweeted out by a couple of different people who have looked up Mr. Adams in LDS Tools, and he's been incarcerated for over a week now. He was convicted a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't report on it because we didn't think it was newsworthy. This guy is a diabolical, he's a really a horrible person who made a lot of bad choices. I don't see that as very newsworthy in and of itself. Okay, but he's still a member of the church now. So he perpetrated back in Utah many years ago and is a convicted sex offender. Then he goes to Minnesota. Then he's accused credibly again of sexual predation after not being background checked by the church. And at no point in time now he's been convicted and incarcerated, and he is still a member of the church. Now, I'm sorry, I'm on a little bit of a rant here, but far from being a one-off here, also the Colorado shooter is also apparently, you looked them up in LDS Tools. I just saw this a couple of days ago. Again, this is very credible information that the Colorado shooter, and I'm not going to say his name, he is also still on the rolls even after committing horrible atrocities. So we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern where the local leaders in the church are keeping people on the rolls who really have, if you're not going to eliminate these two guys off the rolls, then who are we going to eliminate off of the rolls?
This is interesting because this Michael Adam Davis, a repeat offender. It's not like he just committed one crime and then ran away from it. This guy's been in jail multiple times for the exact same thing. So yeah, this is something where he doesn't seem all that repentant.
No, I'm just very, I don't know. I get very upset about this article. Maybe I'm too emotionally invested into it. I don't know. It seems like sometimes that the church is going after people who, write an incendiary Facebook post. Those people, I get called into their bishop's office because they weren't towing the line on some issue. For instance, the BYU Idaho professors who were just fired 3 weeks ago for not upholding the LGBTQ stance that was required of them. Those persons are disciplined, but these other for very innocuous things. But these other individuals who are mass shooters and child sex offenders, they are not. So I'm a little bit exasperated. Rick, am I going too far on this or what?
Well, I mean, I think this relates to politics and the fact that, when we're talking about LGBT issues, that's become so political that anything public is going to be, it almost seems like politics has become a religion. And I think it has infected the church, even church leadership as well, because you see why they get so upset about LGBT postings on Facebook. Whereas this, I guess you could argue that it's not a political thing, and so it doesn't register as high, as important as it probably should. So I think our leaders are susceptible to the current politics, and if somebody, I mean, I never heard of this guy other than I don't. If it was in the Washington Post or something, maybe the church would go after him a little bit more. But even Mark Hoffman, I was curious. I had to look that up. He was not excommunicated until after his sentencing. So, I think the church does try to let the legal process play out. But, once I wish there was something automatic to say, hey, if they're convicted of sex abuse or something, let's get them off the rolls. But there doesn't seem to be anything like that.
That's interesting, Rick, that you mentioned. If you think about the Strengthening Church Members Committee, you have everybody's membership information and presumably some of their private personal information. If you just tied that into a church system that would send an automatic notice to the Strengthening Church Members Committee or even local leadership that says that a member of your congregation has been convicted of a Class A felony, maybe you want to go out and help your member. If there was something automatic that was associated with that, be good. But remember, we're not even at the level of a basic background check yet. We're kind of jumping the gun here. Let's put in a background check for all members before we start thinking about that. I don't know. I'm a little bit bothered by this, but maybe I'm making too much of it. I don't know.
It just seems like there's a couple of steps more that can be taken that aren't being taken by the LDS Church in order to protect its members from predatory deviants or predators. Yeah.
It just seems like instead of culling the web for people who are not towing the perfect line of LGBTQ issues, let's weed out the guys that are the worst of the worst. And it just seems like that our priorities are are not quite straight in some of these situations.
I think that's exactly what it is. It's a matter of priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's for whatever reason it's not a priority.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe there's something legal or something that's involved.
Or maybe they feel like they're piling on. I don't know.
I don't know if there's something legal that's associated with this, because Ted Bundy, he was excommunicated too. Mark Hoffman was, these murders like the Colorado shooter. Do we have to wait for the conviction to hold the hearing? Because I've heard people say that you can't hold a hearing on these guys because he's currently incarcerated in the mental facility there in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is, by the way, right by where my wife is from. And so you can't hold a disciplinary counsel because he's in jail. Can't you hold a disciplinary counsel for someone whether they're in jail or not?
I would think so.
I'm pretty sure you can because they don't require you to be there.
Yeah,
right.
I've heard lots of situations where the people didn't even show up for their disciplinary hearing and they still were excommunicated. So I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah, Mark Hoffman, prime example.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's we're curious to hear your thoughts on that. Drop us a comment in our comment section. We'd be very interested to hear what you, dear listeners, have to hear about that. Or come on over to our website. You can also leave us a voicemail, which we'd be happy to play on the podcast. If you come on over to Anchor, you can record a voicemail and send it to us, and we'd be happy to play that on air. And finally, we also have a lot of bonus content on our Patreon site. We have a number of bonus episodes, articles, and other items. If you like this content, if you find it valuable, please come on over our Patreon, make us a small donation. We'd be very grateful. And that takes us to our final news article here. We'd like to keep these podcasts to about an hour, but this is a very fascinating article, at least for me. And somebody asked, what is the purpose of your podcast? I think the purpose for me, I can say that my own purpose is I like to talk about the articles that are interesting. And for me, this is a very interesting article. And this is the Widow's Mite report that dropped a comprehensive look. I would say the most comprehensive look on general authority compensation that has ever been done. And what they are footnoting all of this. There's been leaked pay stubs all the way back from Mormon Leaks, which became the Truth and Transparency Organization. They have a number of pay stubs that have been leaked, both in 2000 and 2002, in 2013, and in 2014. We've had Elder Eyring's pay stubs have been leaked. We've had a couple of other pay stubs of senior general authorities as well that have been leaked, including Joseph Worthland. And what the Widow's Mite report did is they noticed that the general authorities from all of these leaked pay documents, they all line up on a trajectory of church gives the general authorities a pay raise of 3.1% per year every single year. And if you look at the arc of all the leaked documents, it's a very smooth curve. So we can extrapolate that, because the last leaked documents were not since 2014. But if you extrapolate that out, you can figure out how much the general authorities are making today based on very, very solid evidence. I don't think this is too speculatory. So there's 3 First Presidency members, 12 apostles, and 115 general authority 70s, and 3 presiding bishopric members. That gives us a total of like 120 general authorities, give or take. And basically, the bottom line here is that general authority compensation, a very low estimate of that would be around $250,000 a year, but a more reasonable would be around $259,000 per year, which is where the base pay for the general authorities, according to the Widows Mite report, is $160,000. But then there's also other intangibles that are associated with it as well that are probably in the realm of, say, $100,000, including tuition discounts at BYU and benefits like healthcare benefits and things along those lines. And this is the question that I have for you, Rick, is who do you think is the most highly well compensated general authority today? The Widows Mite report gives what they believe it is, but there is a general authority who's earned more than any other. Who do you think that might be?
Would you want me to cheat and look?
Which we won't be able to tell if you did or not. So just give it your best shot. One general authority has earned almost $7 million in church service. Who do you think?
I think that's a little bit misleading, though. When you're looking at somebody's lifetime, the longer you're in a job, the more money you're going to make, right?
Of course.
So you'd have to look at seniority. Who's the longest senior person? I mean, I guess you would say President Nelson, and then who's next in line? It's probably Ballard, right?
Ballard, according to this, Elder Ballard is tops for general authority compensation, because, as I recall, I think he was a 70 before he became an apostle. That's why he's on top.
Here's what bothers me about this is because when you look at this as total compensation, well, what if I asked you, Dives or Al, what's your total compensation over the lifetime of the last 20 years? That number is going to look. I mean, let's say you make $50,000 a year for 20 years.
I'm sure Dives
That's
will
$1 million.
Look a lot bigger than mine. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you've got $1 million of total compensation. Do you feel like a millionaire?
I'm way off $1 million, but
But I mean, seriously though, if you take 20 years and 50, I mean, that's $1 million. Mm-hmm. You've made $1 million in your lifetime. So to me, that when we're looking at total compensation, this is inflating the number and making it look worse than it probably is, because most people don't say, well, how much money have I made in my lifetime? Mm-hmm. And if you've made $50,000 a year for 20 years, you've made $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes me a little nervous about these kinds of comparisons.
That's a fair point, Rick. Yeah, but at the same time, we've got these general authorities. They are making a modest stipend compared to people of similar positions in different companies. And
I'll just point out what Michael Quinn said, because, he was, when he came out with his book on the church finances, name's slipping me again. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, he's...
a hierarchy of power, origins of power.
Yeah, origins was a different one. Was it hierarchy of power? It might have been hierarchy. But anyway, he said for the amount of money that the church brings in, if you have a general authority, I think at the time was making $120,000 a year. That is very modest for $100 billion company, and so
yeah, absolutely.
That's I just think when you're looking at lifetime compensation, put Mark McGuire or Michael Jordan on there. They're making $30 million a year. These guys pale. Aaron Judge just signed a big contract. You compare them to Aaron Judge or NFL or NBA or whoever. These guys are a pittance compared to major league players. But if you put, hey, Ballard's made $7 million as a church employee. I mean, that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's over 30, 40 years.
I think 50 years.
Well, I think the big difference here
is a lot less than $7 million,
Well, I think the big difference is that prior to the year 2000, it was very much conceded that the leaders of the church were not compensated. That the church was very much against paid clergy. The church is still against paid clergy, but just on a local level. This is something where, Mark McGuire, everybody has understood that he's getting paid to play baseball or whatever. But with regards to the general authorities, it's only been in the last 20 or so years that we've even been aware that these guys are getting that kind of compensation. And that's
but I mean,
knowledge.
even if you put these guys up against the Utah Jazz, they're going to pale in comparison to what
absolutely.
Jazz players make.
Yeah, no question about it. And that's fine.
I don't think the best comparisons are against professional athletes. I think the best comparisons would be against like-sized corporations, the boards of directors of like-sized corporations. So
that's what Michael Quinn did, though, and he said this is really quite modest compared to GE or whoever.
Absolutely, that's my point exactly. If you look at the church is worth about $250 billion with $150 billion in Ensign Peak and $100 billion in real estate. If you look at the boards of directors of people who are in the top echelon of the boards of directors of major companies that are like-sized, the general authorities are vastly underpaid. And I believe that the compensation should be quite a bit higher. In fact, I also believe that the church, the prophet, in my opinion, should be the highest compensated person in the church, and he currently isn't, because we have it released from Australia and from Canada, who require much greater levels of transparency for compensated employees for charities and churches. That the highest compensated employees in both of those countries are in excess of $300,000 per year. So there are they are undercompensated for the amount of work. Plus, it's a lifetime commitment. They're undercompensated. They should be paid far greater. But I think what it really gets down to is, if this was all just a little bit more transparent, then I think everyone would be blessed. I don't see the downside of saying that the general authorities are showing that they're getting $250,000 in compensation. I don't see whose testimony that is going to break.
Yeah, I don't think that's a difficult pill to swallow for most members, but there are several members out there who still believe that the general authorities made their money before becoming general authorities, and that now they are not compensated because the church doesn't believe in paid clergy. But like I said, the church doesn't believe in paid clergy just on the local level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not against transparency. I think it would be great. I just think this graph is misleading because we don't think about how much money we've made in our lifetimes. We would probably be shocked to look and see how much money we've made.
That's true. I think you guys would be shocked to see how little money I've made.
I don't know, Rick. I have a Social Security. I get every year a Social Security statement in the mail that shows me all of my earnings for every year and how much I'm going to expect for Social Security, and they have a total on it. So
they do?
I mean, yeah, well, yeah, it does for me. It says that when I'm, become eligible, I'm going to get a certain dollar amount, and it shows all the years and all of the total money that I have. I think that's a very common thing for people to have.
I don't remember reading that on mine. I mean, we all get those, but I don't remember seeing the total compensation I've had over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about it, but it is a fascinating look, in my opinion, and it is the best look that we're going to get at this particular time regarding the salary of base benefits. Each general authority also gets a compensated for each child. It's $3,600 per year per child. That is taxable income, and then also the general authorities get a parsonage, which is not counted as taxable income. And according to the Widow's Mite, that's in accordance with clergy members are allowed up to 25% of a living allowance that can be called a parsonage, which is for your home, and that is not taxable at either the federal or the state level. And it's just showing the leaked documents here, which I think they've been pretty well verified. I know it's not 100% authenticated, but I think that it's about the best that you're going to get. And it just compares also the median household income of Utah compared to the general authorities, and obviously they're higher, and they definitely should be higher. But for those listeners out there, if you find this type of thing as interesting as we do, then head on over to our Mormon News Roundup, or find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify as well. Let us know what you think about this compensation. Hey, did we cover everything that needs to be covered, gentlemen, or is there any other final thoughts on the Mormon News Roundup for the week?
I think that pretty well sums it up for me.
Yep, I'm good.
Well, we certainly want to thank Rick for joining us. Thank you very much for coming on our Mormon News Roundup. And to our listener, please go check out Rick's YouTube channel. That is Gospel Tangents, and see his interviews. They're really quite fascinating, very entertaining. And thank you again, Rick. We really appreciate you coming on this week. Also, we want to let you know that in the next coming weeks, we have some special guests coming. We have... on the 25th, there's going to be a year in review episode, so look for that on Christmas Day. And also, the following week, we're going to have Rebecca Biblioteca back with us, where we're going to have her join us as another co-host on the news again. So we're really excited about that. All right. Well, I guess we'll take us out now. We're going to give a shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. And thanks to our listeners so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.